So this is part 9 of my attempt to break down the Sami Smith interview with Tony Dodge. I have included a few extra clips in this one as well, which show similar things that Sami has said. I don't think I really need to say much more than this, because by now, if you've not seen the other Sami Smith videos that I've done in this series, then I recommend just going and watching a few of them. Anyway, let's just launch straight into it.
I'm worried that I have a feeling, and obviously, I don't know. I have a feeling that she is still alive and she's still out there and she's still fighting, but that there's somebody else involved, and that's not confirmed. That's just what I believe. I think there has to be somebody else involved in this.
I think it's totally possible that somebody could have taken her and maybe offered to drive her home.
That somebody else was involved is my main concern, and I think a lot of the people of Truckee and Tahoe feel the same way, just that there was somebody else involved, because they haven't found a car yet. They've done helicopter searches over Prosser and all of Truckee. Everybody's looking everywhere constantly for her and her car.
Now, I'm going to share my line of thinking from back when Kylie was actually considered missing. So before she was found. Before I had watched the Tony Dodge interview, and I'd seen that press conference, the outdoors one, and I thought Sami was a little bit odd. But at that stage, I was still not 100% convinced that she was, super dodgy or anything like that. I just thought there's something really strange with this girl. So my initial thoughts were that Kylie's car must have been in the water somewhere. If they hadn't found it somewhere along the side of the road, it must be in the water. And I actually went into Google Maps and I looked at where the Lost Trail Lodge was. I looked at where Prosser was. And I looked at all the different waterways and all the spots where roads came close to waterways and where that may have been where her car could have ended up. Because I had followed a heck of a lot of Adventures with Purpose videos before then. So for me, the logical thing was that she must have somehow gone off the road on her way home, and that there must have been somewhere along Coldstream that her car must have gone into the water. And then the more I saw of Sami Smith, the less I thought that that was a possibility. And I found myself looking into things like the locations of the tunnels in the area. And of course then I heard Megan Cole talking about how people should check empty homes or empty garages. And I must admit that got my radar up too, and I thought, who is this woman who seems quite confident that there is a possibility that this car could be in someone's garage? Is she somehow involved? So this was all before Kylie was found. To me, the thought of someone having taken her just wasn't something that occurred to me. It was the least likely scenario in my mind, because there was no evidence to suggest this. Now, I know here Sami is saying, well, it is my fear that someone took her, and I believe that she is still alive and she is still fighting. Now, some people are going to say that this ties in with that whole Celicia Singh theory. And I'm not going to go deeply into that because there is just not enough there to back up that theory. All we have is some random person coming up with a name and making comments here and there all over the place, and one single creator who apparently had communication with this person. Now, if someone is going to scam people, that's how it's going to happen. So there is not enough there to convince me that any of this Singh stuff is genuine. I believe that what Sami is talking about here comes from her having listened to the Fox 40 interview with Jagger and Kate, and Jagger saying that he believes that Kylie is still alive and still fighting. Because if you listen carefully to all of Sami's interviews, what she has done is exactly the same sort of thing that Megan Cole does, and that is that she has listened to other people and taken on what they have said as her own narrative. And I feel that that's what's happened here. She's taken on Jagger's narrative because it sounds good and it sounds dramatic. So I don't think this is some sort of proof of the Shalisha Singh stuff being real or anything like that. I think this possibly opened up for a scam like the Singh scam, but I don't think Sami ever believed this. Obviously there are a few things like the stomach contents and the alcohol, the amount of alcohol in the autopsy, that suggests that perhaps Kylie didn't die on the night of the party. But if you're going to look at the most logical thing from that, my thoughts would be that something did happen and that there was an injury, and that if she didn't die on the night of the party, that she was hidden somewhere and that it took a while. And I'm not going to go any further into that because it's just disturbing to think of that. But to me, it doesn't immediately point to the prospect of someone having abducted her. This is simply a convenient narrative for Sami because it is pointing attention away from all the teenagers who were at the party. Most specifically, it is pointing attention away from her. And like I've said before, the absence of the vehicle to me does not immediately point to an abduction. If you're going to abduct someone, you're not going to abduct them in their own vehicle. That would be ridiculous. So it is probably one of the least logical explanations for what happened to Kylie. And I know that at one stage you have Angela Muslim going, well, we're thinking abduction because we can't find the car, but that's bullshit. Show me any other investigation where the absence of a vehicle has been taken to mean that there was an abduction. The most logical thing when there is an absence of a vehicle is to believe that the vehicle has run off the road somewhere or that it has ended up in a waterway somewhere.
But
It's
yeah,
it's just so sad. Rhonda's wanting to ask you, did she wear an Apple Watch? Do you know? Did she wear an Apple Watch?
no, I don't believe so.
Now, in terms of the speculation about Sami having some of Kylie's jewellery, I'm just going to say, watch her body language really, really carefully as she is talking about the possibility of an Apple Watch. And then she talks about, we don't really look at what other people are wearing. Watch her eyes and where she is looking.
Oh, I don't remember ever seeing her wear one. It's not something I pay really close attention to. And we're not the type to be like, oh, look at what I have on my wrist. I'm so rich, so.
Yeah, I know.
Now, interestingly enough, it's not the wrist where she had that bracelet, that the beaded one that looked similar to Kylie's. And I will say, from looking at that, I'm not sure that that was Kylie's bracelet, but it's the other wrist. And definitely, she seemed pretty quick to want to put that wrist down out of sight, and then she's looking at it and scrutinizing it. It's something that I noticed the very first time I watched this interview, and every time I've watched it, it has just bothered me. I don't know what the story is there, and they all look like pretty plain bracelets, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that I would necessarily think of as being Kylie's. But I just find it really, really interesting that she's talking about how we don't look closely at what people are wearing, holds her wrist up, and then puts it down really quickly and is studying it. Maybe it's nothing. I don't know. I'd like to know what other people think about that.
You girls are amazing. You seem like wonderful people, and I'm so sorry that you're going through this. Romans 125:26 wants to know: was there any cameras at the campground going into the campground? Is there any cameras there?
No, there's no cameras out there. The closest cameras would be the traffic cameras that start on I-80 near the rec center. It's hard to describe exactly where, but I think it's on Truckee Way. But it's 89 is very covered in cameras. There's not a lot of cameras out there.
And no cameras between Boca and Prosser either, right? I just find it fascinating, and so many people have commented on this, and I totally agree. She seems to be quite aware of where all the traffic cameras are. Why would an 18-year-old girl care where all the traffic cameras are? Maybe she does drink drive a bit, maybe she speeds a bit. I don't know, but it sounds like she is quite familiar and could possibly figure out a route that would avoid traffic cameras if it came to that need.
Shani Jones wants to ask you, on your last call, did she let you know who the quote-unquote friend was that was driving her home?
Yeah, so this is a common misconception. She was not being driven home, and she was not driving. So, okay.
So here she is, pushing her hair back. This question has caused her some anxiety, and it seems to me that she's blurted out the wrong thing and she realises it. This is a common misconception. She was not being driven and she wasn't driving. What does that leave? And she's suddenly realised what she said, basically, that she's left no other option. So this is where the new narratives comes in of, well, Kylie was going to stay the night. And we know that that is an out-and-out lie. Kylie had a curfew. Kylie had spoken to her mother and said that she was leaving the party at a specific time to get home. She would have had no reason to decide to turn around and stay the night. And I think what Sami has done here is that she's put her foot in it and admitted that, well, you know, nobody was going to drive Kylie, and then she's pointed out that Kylie wasn't going to drive herself. Why wasn't Kylie going to drive herself? Because that was always the plan. And yet Sami seems to know that at the point that Sami supposedly left the party, Kylie was no longer going to be driving herself home. Why is that? She wasn't ever planning on staying the night. That is a new narrative that Sami introduced here in this interview after she put her foot in it and said these two things.
At the end of the party, when I saw her.
When she called, when I saw her. Now, we've all taken this to be Sami saying that she's talking about when Kylie called Sami, or getting it confused and then saying when I saw her. But is it possible that in Sami's eyes, the end of the party was when Kylie contacted her mum to say she was going to be late? Because there are contradictions in what Lindsay has said too. And we've heard a few instances where on one hand she said that Kylie called her to say she was going to be late. Another instance where she said she texted her. So, is it possible that Kylie actually called her mum as opposed to text her, and that Sami is referring to that? Or is Sami messing up here and talking about Kylie calling her or calling someone else?
She was supposed to give me a ride home because I had asked her to give me a ride home because I wanted to stay later. I then realized later in the party that I believe she was drunk, and I knew she was drunk, and so I did not want her to be driving me home, because I know about drunk drivers and all that, and so
Smart.
and I figured she would be staying there or she would find a ride home because she's a smart girl. She's smart enough to know, she's smart, and so
Sami has this very, very well rehearsed narrative. The bit about her asking for a ride and then deciding that she wasn't going to get a ride because she realised that Kylie was too drunk to drive her home. And that is such a well rehearsed narrative. It doesn't change from any of the interviews. And I will point out, people will say, well, if it doesn't change that, doesn't that mean that it's truthful? But what I'm going to say is that when someone is explaining something that happened, as they explain it, they will remember other elements. So that the next time they explain it, it will be consistent with what they've said before, but they may well introduce other elements to their narrative. All these rehearsed narratives that Sami puts out there are pretty much identical. They're not her talking about something that has happened and processing it in her mind as she's talking about it and visualising it, and then the next time round adding additional information to what she's saying, but it is sticking with a solid narrative that has no variations. So to me, that says that this is utter bullshit, and that the whole narrative bit about wanting to get a ride and changing her mind because Kylie was drunk is pure narrative. It is not something that she experienced. Note also that here we have this element of the narrative that is intended to give the impression that Kylie was abducted, or that she did not leave the party by her own means, because Sami is saying, well, she's smart. She's too smart to drink drive. So at this point in time, while Kylie is still missing, we're supposed to believe that Kylie couldn't possibly have caused her own demise because she's too smart. She wouldn't drink drive. She'd never do that. And yet that all changes after Kylie's been found.
Then I found her as I was leaving the party. I was making sure to find her to tell her that I had another ride home, and that I loved her and I wanted to say bye and for her to have fun at the party.
Now, I always got a sense of deja vu listening to Sami saying this, because if you followed the Summer Wells case, she's doing the same thing here that Candace Wells Bly did when she was talking about the period of time from when she got home to when Summer supposedly went missing. It doesn't sound like a natural explanation, but rather someone who is reciting a narrative that they have made up. The inflections are not someone who is just naturally explaining something. And even the body language, the looking up, trying to remember exactly what she's got to say. To me, it is all about trying to remember what the actual script is here and trying to stick with the script. It's all a very well rehearsed script, in my opinion.
And then when I left the party, we were pretty much on 89 with my ride, and she called me as I was in the car in the passenger seat, and
okay, I'm not going to introduce anything new here by saying it, but I'll just quickly mention it was really odd, the being in the car in the passenger seat, and also the fact that she never mentions who her ride is, and that even Megan Cole is so protective about letting us know who Sammy's ride was.
She was like, "Hey, where are you? Do you still need a ride home?" And I was like, "No, I'm okay. Like, I'm in the car right now. I'm getting driven home now."
Clearly that part of the narrative just wasn't as well rehearsed as other parts of the narrative. Her saying, "I'm getting driven home," after making it clear that she was in the passenger seat. So either she never left the party and none of that happened, and here she is trying to make up the narrative as she goes along, which is why she messes up with the things she's saying, which is quite likely, or she's lying about something. Was she driving? Who knows? I am leaning towards the fact that she did drive away from the party in someone else's car.
But Kylie did not have a set ride home, and I was under the impression that she would either sleep there or find another ride home. And
I honestly think that what we're seeing here is that her narrative is falling apart, and she knows that her narrative is falling apart. So now she's clutching at straws, trying to add to the narrative, trying to find something convincing to add to the narrative, to hide the part where she's completely screwed up.
It was not known that anybody was going to give her a ride home. She was not, when she called me, she was not in a car. I could hear the party and many people talking in the background.
So she shot herself in the foot here, and I'm not sure if she realised what she did, but here she is trying to put forward this notion that she couldn't possibly have had anything to do with what happened to Kylie, because she left and Kylie was still at the party. And she knows that Kylie was still at the party because she could hear people talking in the background when she spoke to Kylie on the phone. And she's also saying that it wasn't known that anyone was going to give Kylie a lift. So her narrative is starting to twist a little bit here, because she's so adamant in other interviews that she was the last person to speak to Kylie, the last person to see Kylie, the last person to know what was going on. And how is that possible if Kylie was still at the party, as she could hear the party in the background when she was talking to Kylie on the phone? You would not presume that you were the last person to speak to someone if you're talking to them and you can hear a party going on in the background. That's just insane. So in her effort to try and turn around and say, well, we didn't know that anyone was going to give Kylie a lift home, and to try and prove that nobody was going to give Kylie a lift home by saying that you could hear the party in the background, and that gives you also an alibi because you'd already left the party and you were talking to her on the phone, and you know that she was still at the party because you could hear the party. So her whole narrative here has just fallen apart completely. She's well and truly shot herself in the foot and just lied. Either Kylie was still at the party and you spoke to her on the phone after you'd left the party, meaning that you weren't the last person to see Kylie or speak to Kylie, or all that is completely made up, and perhaps when you left the party, no one else saw Kylie after that time. So I did have every intention of making this the final instalment of the Sami Smith interview with Tony Dodge. But I've realised when I've hit this point that that very last part of the interview is so very significant. And the things she is saying and the way she is saying them to me are important. And I realise that I'm going to have quite a lot to say about them. So I'm going to stop this one here and put that final bit into a final video. So that will make it a 10-part series. Hopefully I haven't drawn this out too much and fried people's brains with boredom. But yeah, I think that that last part, I know there is a lot in that. And I think to do it justice, I'd need to do it in a separate video. So thanks for watching. Please hit the like, hit subscribe if you haven't already done so, and leave a comment below.